every need and desire, but we are in fact only human, and thus have needs of our own. We cannot simply be parents, we have to be people first. That doesn't mean you should ignore your children's needs. Of course, you as a parent have to make sacrifices, often far more than you would like. I'm basically saying you shouldn't ignore your very legitimate needs that can be found on this pyramid, such as maintaining your relationship with your spouse. If you are merely a vehicle through which your child gets his every want fulfilled, it's going to be extremely difficult to form an actual relationship with that kid, because to him, you're not a person.
Greetings, soldier.
Welcome
to my humble shop.
Emmett is so
Please,
willing
take a look at
and
my
eager
interest
to be
here.
a friend.
And no, I
that he
don't really
fails to
care
realize
which
he
side
needs to
you're
be
on,
a
just
person
so long as you
before
fill
that
my
can
pockets,
happen. Again, his desire for a
You can't
relationship
afford
is
it.
commendable and gives him
Well,
a
sorry,
solid base,
soldier.
but it
I
has
cannot
been
give
taken
credit.
to an
Come back
extreme,
when you're
as
a
all
bit
otherwise
richer,
admirable
eh?
qualities can, and so it becomes the very vice which prevents him from obtaining the thing that he desires above all else. We find this same theme echoed but played out quite differently in the opening scenes of Wreck-It Ralph, as the titular character finds himself increasingly resentful of the role he is coded to play and the ensuing loneliness that he has had to endure over the past 3 decades. Ralph, like Emmett, wants to be accepted by his fellows, wants to belong, to be appreciated and loved. However, the problem he will have to overcome is practically the exact opposite of Emmett's challenge. Where Ralph demands his fellow characters take and accept him as he is,
And I'm a big part of the game, technically speaking.
Emmett's mirroring behavior absolutely screams, take me as you are. They both share the desire for relationship and belonging, but they are approaching it from 2 opposite angles. And it's apparent that Ralph's desire for relationship is less pure and others-centric than Emmett's is. Where Emmett is willing to change literally anything about himself just to fit in, Ralph would have everyone else turn on a dime and change their attitudes toward him, because he too wants to be able to eat cake and party. Should the Nicelanders simply accept that Ralph has to play his part during the day and isn't really so bad, and thus be willing to include and befriend him? Should Emmett's coworkers see that he's genuinely trying to be friendly and encourage him to cultivate his own interests? Yeah, sure. But these aren't their stories. If everyone changes to accommodate our heroes, even if those changes are done in the name of fairness and kindness, what value is there in that story? What kind of message is that? Just demand everyone else change so you don't have to would be a pretty terrible takeaway from a film. Which leads me to rule number 2. If you are the solution, then you must also be the problem. When asked what is wrong with the world, G.K. Chesterton allegedly replied simply, I am. Whether or not he ever actually wrote that witty, seemingly self-deprecating reply is up for debate, but what is certain is the wisdom of those words. I can blame anyone
greetings,
and everyone
soldier.
I want
Welcome to my
about
humble shop.
whatever
Please, take a
unfortunate
look at my interest
circumstances
here.
I may find
And
myself
no, I don't really
in.
care
But even
which
if
side
my
you're on,
every
just so long as you
accusation
fill my
is
pockets,
100% truthful, what can I do about it? Can I change the past? Can I change how people act? Can I even change how others perceive me? No, not really, and not directly. Our influence over how others think and act is generally quite weak, and weaker still if we have an external attribution. We cannot empower ourselves by trying to change others, by yelling at them about how they should accept us, or how their ways are foolish, outdated, or short-sighted. If you want to change the world, you have to change yourself first. This is hardly new wisdom. I did just quote a late 19th, early 20th century author after all, but it remains relevant because, well, we as human beings are generally quite prone to repeating our errors. It's uncomfortable to admit that you are in your own way, and that whatever real external obstacles you may face, they will not just up and move unless you conquer them yourself. So when Hollywood, and by Hollywood I do mostly mean Disney, writes characters who become the answer to all their own problems, but who were never once their own stumbling blocks, I fail to see how that is inspiring or empowering. Let's take 2020 Mulan, also better known as T-Mulan, because it's just a perfect example of how to completely botch a sure thing. The original Mulan was another wonderful lesson on how to properly write a character who becomes self-actualized, in no small part because the main battle she has to fight is how to overcome her own innate shortcomings. It wasn't Mulan's fault that she was slower and weaker than the rest of her fellow trainees, just as much as it's not to my credit that I'm taller and can lift more weight than my wife.
It's not my fault being the biggest and the strongest. I don't even exercise.
But it would be obviously useless for her to moan and complain about life being unfair, and even more so to demand that the army lower its standards to accommodate her. Instead, Mulan adapted. She knew there might be all sorts of factors holding her back, but she also knew that the only thing that she could truly change was herself. And so she did just that. Compare that to Team Mulan, in which the titular character just has superpowers, which she finally and fully unlocks by admitting who she really is.
Your deceit weakens you. It poisons your chi.
In other words, the world is holding you back by demanding that you fit into a role. If she would only accept the fact that the world is stupid and she's already awesome, she will reach her fullest potential. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there's not some good in that. You absolutely should seek truth and fight for what you believe in. If others don't like it, well, you can't change them. But I just do not know how you take a story like the original Mulan and flatten out the character arc like you're rolling out pizza dough. No, not even pizza dough, pierogi dough. Look it up. Having to accept one's own inherent awesomeness is a far cry from the actual meaningful character work found in stories like the Lego Movie and Wreck-It Ralph, the later of which exemplifies rule number 2 fantastically. At almost every point in his journey, Ralph gets in his own way. Right from the start, we see that his mere size and ensuing clumsiness are severe impediments to the belonging and acceptance that he so badly desires. Obviously, it's not really his physical characteristics that hold Ralph back during most of his journey, but rather his own internal motivation.
If you want a medal, we'd let you live up here in the penthouse.
Our would-be hero takes Jean, who is a bit of a bully despite his minute stature, at his word and proceeds to obtain a medal, lose said medal, and then devote every ounce of his energy to reclaiming the prize that will, he believes, grant him everything his heart desires, which, as his daydream shows, is hardly pure and selfless. This tireless pursuit of a shiny golden circle tells us that Ralph is still seeking to change others. He isn't trying to be or act any different, he simply wants to look different in the eyes of his fellow blocks of code in order to fulfill his own ideas of what happiness is.
Pies, ice sculptures, fireworks.
Which will, of course, as he discovers once he returns to his own game, turn out to be hollow and meaningless. Because of course it is. After all, the characters in the arcade all start out with the first 2 tiers of Maslow's pyramid already satisfying. Or, well, most of them do anyway. We as humans can derive some happiness from material goods, at least to the point where we are no longer struggling to survive and are free to thrive in more meaningful ways. But once we have all the stuff we truly need, no extra amount of money, cars, or Fortnite skins will ever move our happiness meter 1 inch, at least not for any significant amount of time. Genuine happiness can only be found by moving up the pyramid, and that means forming loving relationships built on self-giving love. If you want proof of that claim, I would refer you to the longest running study on happiness conducted by Harvard, which found that across sociological and economic classes, the best predictor of lasting happiness is authentic relationship with other people. This is something that Ralph doesn't quite understand yet, but Emmett, as we discussed, did from the very start. But he got in his own way by trying to get out of everyone else's. His coworkers and neighbors looked at him and saw him doing his best impression of a mirror and found him entirely uninteresting. I can absolutely relate. That guy who stares back at me while I'm brushing my teeth every morning is just the absolute worst. That dum-dum is constantly getting in my path of success by failing to get enough sleep because he tried to reclaim some sense of freedom by staying up late watching YouTube videos that he's already seen. He is 100% the villain in my story. I suppose you could rephrase self-actualization rule number 2 to say, if your character is the hero, he must also be the villain. Stories like Team Mulan fail because they make self-actualization a man versus man conflict, or a man versus society conflict, where it is inherently meant to be a battle of man versus self. Obviously, it is possible and quite often necessary to include more than just one type of conflict within a story. Wreck-It Ralph does have an external villain in King Candy/Turbo, who shaped his game, his world, according to his every wish and design, much as Ralph would have liked to. But since Ralph is the hero of the story, since he encounters Vanellope and discovers that he does in fact have a heart, that he cares about the fate of someone other than himself, our protagonist does not ultimately fall victim to that same self-serving mindset. Oh, he starts out in that place, and it takes him a while to leave it, which leads me to rule number 3. Self-actualization must be process. This is such an obvious statement that it almost seems silly to include it, but if you have watched the horrifically disappointing Obi-Wan Kenobi Disney Plus show, then you might know what I'm talking about. Obi-Wan's character journey, if you can call it that, in his own show, is to return to his former status as a courageous and effective Jedi Master who is willing to continue the fight even though it seems hopeless. We'll talk about the issues inherent in that premise in rule number 4, but for the purposes of this rule, the main issue happens a little over halfway through the show, as Obi-Wan and Tala are approaching the Inquisitor's fortress where Leia is being held captive. A series of scenes that has a whole host of logical problems, but I already made that video like 2 whole years ago. Anyway, I'll just show you the problem.
You care about Leia. Then you're gonna have to try.
That's it. That's his character development. That's how he becomes self-actualized. This random woman he has just met tells him to try to get his Jedi powers back for the sake of Leia, so he does. He just does. Don't ask me how. He did it, it's done now, move on. Look at the pretty lights. You love pretty lights. Again, there is something good here. Obi-Wan Kenobi should and does care about the little girl who he rescued, whose father he trained and loved like a brother. And the message, try, can be a powerful one. It is an exhortation to hope even when all seems dark, to fight even when the struggle seems pointless. But it's just so rushed here. It just happens. That's it. He's good. He's a Jedi again. We can get back to kicking Imperial ass. Where is the growth? Where is the struggle that viewers can understand and relate to? Where is the fight? If you were going to go with this recycled premise of old sad man learns to hope again, the least you could do was execute it well. Alas, Obi-Wan Kenobi is no Logan. The speed at which Obi-Wan goes from completely incompetent to indistinguishable from his episode 3 self would put Vanellope von Schweetz to shame. Ralph's growing affection for that little vagrant, of course, is ultimately what brings about his self-actualization, but it takes time. At first, he is completely unwilling to help the brat who stole his medal. Then, seeing no other way forward, he reluctantly agrees to help her out, in part because he finds out that she shares his plight as the black sheep of her respective console. Mere sympathy, however, is not a replacement for genuine selfless love.
Just keep telling yourself, I must win Ralph's medal or his life will be ruined.
If Ralph truly cared for Vanellope, as he ought to, perhaps he wouldn't be so inclined to believe King Candy's story about why the glitch cannot be allowed to erase. It was a convenient truth, one that allowed him to get what he wanted without having to do any more soul-searching or really any more work at all. A truth that leads to the most heart-wrenching scene in the entire game.
I made it for you, just in case we don't win.
What I'm saying is, you can't be a racer.
What? No, please,
I mean, yikes. We had been watching Ralph and Vanellope gradually grow their bond into one of mutual trust and affection, one seemingly becoming genuine philia. And then in the space of a few minutes, it all shatters. The road to self-actualization, the climb to reach the apex of our potential, is never one without detours and setbacks, most often caused by the character's own flaws and failings. This is doubtless true in real life, as we tend to be our own worst enemies. We are necessarily going to delay and impede our own progress. This is how stories should reflect our own world. This is how you do representation. Not by showing us characters who happen to look like us or share some other surface level attributes, but rather those whose virtues, vices, struggles, triumphs, and yes, failures might just remind us of our own. How many times have I chosen some insignificant good that I momentarily desired over the real and meaningful good of another person? More times than I can count, I'm sure, though I've never been very good at the whole numbers thing. I might watch Wreck-It Ralph and yell, "How could you be so blind?" at the big fella. But then it should only take me a moment of self-reflection to realize that I have been Ralph, albeit in a less dramatic fashion, on an innumerable number of occasions. He had obtained everything he ever wanted, only to find his reward quite literally hollow and empty. His one shining moment turned out to be his lowest, darkest point. And as you might expect, we find a similar setback in the LEGO Movie, a film which I have talked about decidedly too little thus far, despite its protagonist's character arc being the origin of this video idea. Emmett has been slowly built up over the course of the first half of the movie. It wasn't exactly a smooth ride. He swung from lonely and disappointed to suddenly elated with the prospect of being the special, back to hapless and inadequate, and then finally his ability to innovate and thus to build began to show itself. That all leads to this scene, where he finds himself placed in the middle of the assembled master builders and is asked to take on the task of leading their would-be rebellion. And it goes less well than he might have hoped.
He is the least qualified person in the world to lead us. And you are right.
You're right about him being a ding-dong.
Just when it seemed Emmett might have a chance to live up to the exceedingly high expectations that the others had piled upon him, he crashes and burns. This is the all-important major setback that basically all stories about self-actualization will contain. It forces our hero to answer the question, who am I, when I'm not who I thought I was, who I thought I could be? Do I give up on my dreams? Do I find a new one? Do I return to my old dissatisfying life? The answer will depend, based on the story, of course, though I doubt any narrative worth its salt would have the protagonist simply give up and go home. The story's setback isn't required to be as dramatic as Emmett causing an entire LEGO realm to go up in flames. But without such a backslide, the growth of the main character will appear too easy, the struggle less real, and thus the story less inspiring and edifying. Why do bad things happen to good people? So they can become better people. And if we do not become better, we will one day cease to be good. Which brings me to the fourth and final rule for writing self-actualization. Rule number 4, show growth. End better than you began. As with rule number 3, that sounds so obvious as to be completely and totally unnecessary. I mean, duh. Of course, someone reaching their fullest potential is going to grow throughout the course of their story, right? Well, here's where the Obi-Wan Kenobi show comes into play yet again. See, at the outset of this particular tale, Obi-Wan is starting out in a despondent, lonely, and bitter state.
The fight is done. We lost.
He does grow, albeit clumsily, as the show unfolds though, so what's the problem? The issue here lies not so much in what this story does tell us, but rather in what it does not. When episode 3 ended, Obi-Wan had undoubtedly suffered a major setback. Okay, good, great. But in that same movie, he, being a Jedi Master, resolved to continue doing whatever he could to protect those who could not protect themselves, to keep a flicker of hope alive even as the Republic and the galaxy fell into darkness. Cut to the man's own show, and somehow that spark has been completely snuffed out. How? Why? The answer to that latter question is apparently because the writers couldn't be bothered to do anything other than to copy and paste sequel trilogy Luke Skywalker's arc onto this pale imitation of Obi-Wan Kenobi. As a result, the man at the end of these 6 episodes is by no stretch of the imagination any braver, wiser, or smarter than he was at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Because his arc, as far as this miniseries is concerned, should have started there, not when the Disney Plus logo rolled onto the screen. And Obi-Wan absolutely could have become more self-actualized than he already was. Just imagine his show was about him choosing to hunt down an Imperial raiding force, only to find out that it was led by Commander Cody, and having to deal with the conflicting desires to keep fighting the good fight and saving the man who served him so loyally and so well during the Clone Wars. But nah, that kind of nuance would take too much time to write, or maybe Disney thought that the dumb Star Wars fans couldn't follow such a complicated interior journey. So they went back to Old Reliable, which everyone just adored in the sequels. Anyway, yes, that rule sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times it gets violated. Did Mulan really become a better person by the end of her story? Did she? Well, let's ask her dad.
Knows another. You were always there. Yet I see you for the first time.
In other words, nope, she was always awesome, everyone else just needed to realize it. Now in the interest of fairness, Mulan does suffer a setback when she is expelled from her regiment. It's just not a setback of her own making, really, so that takes away from potential character growth. and she at least uses her ridiculously OP abilities for the sake of her country and its people. And in the end, she does refuse the place of honor among the Emperor's guards in order to rejoin her family, which is good and admirable. Let it never be said that I can't extract something edifying out of even the lamest of stories. And that's exactly what Team Mulan is, really. Lame. Where its predecessor ran, it barely manages to shuffle along. It gave its titular character so little room to grow by setting her up as it did, and the entire story suffered for that fact. Those two narratives, which we are mostly done examining, failed the same rule in drastically different ways. One, because it refused to actually develop the character in the same manner as the story it was retelling, and the other because it asked us to believe in a setback that we never witnessed, and that made absolutely no sense instead of actually continuing the character's internal journey. But like I said, we're moving on, finally approaching the apexes of Ralph's and Emmett's journeys, the moments when they become self-actualized and reach their fullest potential. For Mr. Bukowski, that starts with the realization that in the midst of all these really innovative and unique master builders, he was the one who stands out, purely because he is used to following instructions. His journey to the top actually begins immediately after his major setback, when everyone else around him effortlessly dives into the task of building an escape sub, and Emmett is lost and useless without someone to guide his steps.
Anyone know what this is, and do you need it?
I had to include that joke. Had to. That's the one moment in the theater that I remember clear as day for this movie. I must have had 50 of those little joints lying around, and I don't think I ever used a single one of them. It goes to show that the scriptwriters were extremely familiar with their subject matter, which I deeply appreciate. Anyway, one of Emmett's best moments comes immediately after that scene, as Unikitty bemoans the fall of her home.
I'm so sorry, Unikitty.
The Master Builders are all incredibly talented in their own unique ways, which, as a later scene lays out more explicitly, leads to a heightened sense of individualism. Emmett serves as a counterweight to the rest of them. As he has since the beginning been so others-centered, he is more naturally inclined to comfort and encourage others. Emmett, unlike our other hero, never had to shake off any natural selfish inclinations, but rather had to figure out what he could give to others that no one else would. As much as the story of this movie revolves around him, Emmett's worldview is still very much centered on those whom he loves. When Wildstyle tells him what it means to be the special, we see Emmett's face light up at the prospect of being the smartest, most talented person in the world. Why? Well, let him tell I am blessed with an incredibly loving wife who thinks the world of me, and if I were half the man she sees me as, well, I'd have to go on Etsy and buy one of those world's best husband mugs. I don't understand why they make so many of those. Anyway, this is why Emmett's self-actualization is truly heroic. He strives to reach his fullest potential for the sake of others, and he does so despite Vitruvius' revelation that the whole prophecy business is made up, with a little help from the totally serious Ghost Vitruvius, who tells him to listen to the cat poster and believe that he is capable of great things despite not being the chosen one.
But how can I just decide to believe that I'm special? I'm not.
Because the world depends on it.
Not because Emmett deserves to be appreciated, not because everyone else needs to stop holding him back and recognize his awesomeness, but because everyone else is relying on him. The Lego Movie achieves its protagonist's self-actualization because it began with a solid foundation. It showed us that this was a good man who never fell victim to the me-first mindset that plagues our modern world, but who had to stop holding up a mirror to others and expecting them to like him, who had to discover what gifts he had been given that would allow him to love his friends to the best of his abilities. It's all remarkably corny. I mean, Emmett defeats Lord Business by convincing him that he doesn't need to be the bad guy, that he is the special, that everyone is the special, but it's still so freaking good, because it speaks to that universal truth that each and every person on this earth is unique, inimitable, and unrepeatable, that every single one of us matters in ways we can hardly understand. And accompanying that truth is yet another fundamental one. We need and are made for one another. While Emmett always understood that fact to some degree, realizing the value of others, of a single person, is the challenge that Ralph has to overcome in order to fulfill his own potential. After all, it's hard to value someone else when no one has ever valued you. And granted, no one really ever thought much of Emmett, but he thought they did, so he didn't show the same resentment and selfishness that Ralph does. All Ralph ever wanted, at least as far as our story is concerned, was to be respected, to be shown kindness, to enjoy some well-earned comforts after a day of hard work. And all those desires are perfectly fine in their own right, but they are not simply milestones we can reach if we do certain things and check certain boxes. They are instead the fruits of relationships we have built on the foundation of self-giving love. When we left him, Ralph had been given his medal and returned to his own console, only to find it abandoned. It turns out, when we disregard our duties in pursuit of our own impulsive goals, things tend to go south. And if Ralph were a truly miserable man who would rather see others suffer with him than let them be happy while he is not, he would have simply let his game get unplugged out of spite. And perhaps he would have done just that if he hadn't gone on this journey, if he hadn't met Vanellope and come to care for her, albeit in a flawed way, a way that he now seeks to perfect. Ralph very well could return to Sugar Rush, bust Felix out of jail, and at least get his life back as it was, but he has a nobler goal in mind. He has discovered that love does exist and resolves to act out of genuine self-disinterest for the first time in his life.
Please, Felix, fix it. I promise I will never try to be good again.
What Ralph means, of course, is that he's going to stop trying to be a hero and has resolved to be someone's hero. In other words, he now understands that heroism does not mean cake, fireworks, and ice sculptures, but rather bravery, humility, and self-sacrifice. When the story reaches its climax, the cybugs overrunning Sugar Rush and everyone evacuating, Ralph has a very simple choice to make: himself or Vanellope. All the other characters have fled to safety, but the little glitch is stuck inside her own game, doomed to be eaten by the virus. But Ralph won't have it. He abandoned her once, never again.
I will never be good, and that's not bad.
This is how you write self-acceptance. Ralph says those words as he dives headfirst into a mountain of Mentos, anticipating the sweet release of death as they combine with the cola hot springs underneath, willingly giving his own life to save that of another. No greater heroism exists, and yet Ralph values himself with nothing aside from what he can give to others. There is no one he'd rather be than him, because the life he has lived has led him to this moment, has allowed him to finally find within himself the capacity for genuine love. A love that is, as self-sacrificial love ought to be, returned with equal measure. Ralph mercifully doesn't die, especially as this is a kid's movie, but instead is saved by Vanellope risking her own skin, a decision which eventually leads to her reinstatement as a racer. Ralph's return to his villainous role, albeit with a little more charity shown toward him by his fellow characters, and a delightfully happy ending.
That little kid likes me. How bad can I be?
Why do we strive to reach our fullest potential? So we can love and serve others, including those who have lovingly and selflessly helped us and shown us the way. Who stands in the way of our self-actualization? Ourselves. At the very least, we are the only problems that we always have the power to solve. Is this process a quick and easy one? No, of course not. No road worth traveling, metaphorically speaking, is ever a smooth downhill ride with clear lines of sight. Detours, setbacks, and even dead ends that require us to turn around and try a new route are inevitable and numerous. But what can we do about it? We can grow. We can acknowledge that we can't change what's done, but we can and must move on, because the people we love are counting on us to do just that. Hello there. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and a very special thank you to all my generous patrons over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel and get bonus behind-the-scenes content, access to our Discord, and the ability to vote on video and stream ideas, please consider becoming a patron. For higher tiers, I'm offering new monthly Discord calls and my services as a critic of your own writing or video making. If you'd like to stay on YouTube, channel memberships have all the same benefits. Regardless, I am still super grateful that you are here as we continue to talk about the stories that really matter. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about Wreck-It Ralph, the Lego Movie, or any other suggestions you might have for a story you love that you'd like to see featured on this channel. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.
Name a more iconic egg than Reese's. All right. Can you? I guess it's a tie.
Impeccable. Meaning of behavior, performance, or appearance in accordance with the highest standards of propriety. That is exactly what I think of Disney as well. Oh yes, and inside, upon my most recent rewatch of Wreck-It Ralph, I discovered that the movie is not only as good as I remembered it being, but in fact, much better. Disney's very best movies, and dare I say, even one of the greatest animated movies ever made. Just sit back and relax as I explain why Wreck-It Ralph is an impeccably perfect movie. Before the plot can even begin to happen, before Ralph even shows up on the screen, the movie has already secured its place as one of the most creative and unique Disney movies, as the normal Disney animation logo at the beginning is replaced with an 8-bit version and an accompanying tune. Now that I thought it was a great example of how much attention to detail and care was put into this movie. Actually, let me also quickfire a few other non-plot related elements that are very nice as well, but because they don't impact the plot, I won't be mentioning them later. Great comedy. Ralph's design. Felix's design. In which everyone's design. The creative and unique setting. The detail of the Icelanders having a low frame rate. The many well-integrated and surprisingly unintrusive references to gaming, including my personal favorite with the code for the Sugar Rush Vault. Good animation. And the movie actually justifies being an animated movie as well, with its unique setting. Decent music score, etc. Oh, and also, I just wanted to thank all you guys who watched my previous videos and subscribed. You guys really mean a lot to me. Just want to let you know that. Without further ado, I present to you the S-tier plot of Wreck-It Ralph. Just seconds into the movie, Ralph is an instantly engaging character. His intro narration is pretty chill and relatable. It tells us everything we need to know in a clever, unique, and engaging way. Ralph, being someone who does his job perfectly, but gets no respect or love despite it, is such a perfect idea for a character, and connecting all that to a world filled with flawed misconceptions and stereotypes is even more genius. As we will soon find out, Ralph's role in this game is actually very, very important. But unfortunately, Ralph has been led to believe otherwise by his own game's characters. A few moments later, Ralph drops the bomb on the other villains that he isn't actually happy and wants to be a hero instead of a villain. The other villains attempt to explain why he is wrong, but Ralph isn't exactly very receptive. And also I should mention that M. brings up something about going turbo, a brief moment later, of course. Now, the villains in this meeting may sound ridiculous, and the scene is played mostly for comedy. However, that is actually the writer's clever trick to throw you off. That way, you won't realize all the villains are actually completely correct about everything that is said to Ralph. The main advice is to accept the fact who you are and unique place in the world, because you're just as important as everyone else. There's no one else who does the same thing. Make sure to take it. Acceptance is, in fact, the main theme of this movie, and it ties into every character's personal arc. The villain in the movie is surprisingly important emotional affirmation song about how being a bad guy isn't actually a bad thing, and that they are powerful. Also, make sure to keep note of this scene as well. You know, I might even say this first villain is the most important in the film. The only problem with saying this is that you can say that about just about any scene in the movie. Every scene in this movie is so intricately woven together, like a beautiful tapestry. To poetic. Ultimately, Ralph doesn't even respond much to the ultimate device, but, I mean, who really immediately take the advice of friends or acquaintances who you probably just met anyway? Another seemingly small scene happens next, as the dangers of game jumping are actually established before we even know what going turbo really means. I'm referring to Ralph taking the cherries from Pac-Man. When Ralph takes the cherries, he gets in trouble because you're not supposed to take away something from its original game, but Ralph manages to weasel his way out of this one. So, Ralph gets back to his game, only to find out the others took a dunk on him and decided to throw a party while he was away. They even invited people who weren't part of the game. But of course, he got no invite. Ralph rightfully gets upset at the disrespect on display. He marches his way up the building and awkwardly interrupts the party. But the Nicelanders, these guys, don't want to let him in because he's the villain and he deserves no respect. He'll just wreck the building. This ends up escalating the situation as Ralph takes things very personally. Ralph claims that he deserves a medal, to the dismay of the Nicelanders, so they challenge Ralph, saying that only heroes get medals. But Ralph responds back saying that he could be a hero if he wanted, and bets that he'll get a medal to prove it. At this point, every character has some sort of flawed worldview, believing only heroes can be good, and that medals are what make you great. But of course all this will come back to smack them on the back later. The situation only gets worse when Ralph tries to fix the rigged cake to be in his favor, but in his anger, he kind of accidentally becomes the very thing the Nicelanders believe him to be, a subtle hint towards things to come. The Nicelanders are so certain that they know exactly what kind of a person Ralph is, and that he won't actually be able to get a medal. Ralph, on the other hand, feels worthless and is willing to stake everything on this medal. Ralph discovers a new game where you get a medal just by climbing a tower. So, he tries to just jump in, get a medal, and get out. Meanwhile, the Nicelanders soon realize that they may have underestimated Ralph's dedication when he doesn't show up for the arcade opening. They only begin to realize how vitally important he was as soon as he isn't there anymore. Big oof. Should have thought that medal challenge through a bit more, eh? With their game now at risk, Felix heroically heads out as heroes do. But little does Felix realize, Ralph isn't the only one whose worldview is being challenged. Ralph showcases, with his disastrous attempt at hero's duty, that everyone is made with a purpose, and trying to be something you aren't is probably not going to get you very far. But as soon as he chucks that body armor, Ralph is actually able to make some progress. However, he is still blinded by his desire for the medal, so much so that he doesn't even realize what trouble he is causing in the moment. Also, might I add that Ralph essentially cheated to get this medal, making it not truly the medal of a hero anymore. But Ralph is so caught up in the illusion of grandeur that he doesn't even consider that. So, Ralph and his new Cybug buddy end up taking an accidental ride into the Sugar Rush game. Also, speaking of Cybugs, they cleverly represent the dangers of greed and trying to be something you aren't with their powers of absorption. Or maybe I'm just looking too deep into their potential purpose. Either way, they make a great world-ending threat. Additionally, the Cybugs can only be destroyed by a giant beacon. This may yet again seem like a minor detail, but no, my friend, unless it's a gaming or dessert reference, nothing in this movie is a minor detail. It is always subtly building towards the ultimate climax. Another thing to note is that Ralph knows the beacon can destroy the Cybugs because he saw it happen. Why am I telling you to remember this? Well, you'll see. About now is when Ralph at last meets our final main character, Vanellope. Though, he could care less about what she is saying, since the medal is clearly more important, right? But Ralph is still stuck in a game that isn't his own, and his lack of knowledge leads to his downfall into an icing pond. Meanwhile, Vanellope snatches his precious medal. Next up on the docket, King Candy, aka the last great Disney villain. I can't really say much about him now, since all the juicy parts relating to his character come later on. But I can't say how perfectly annoying he is in his selfishness. He may seem to be just an unlikable guy, but his selfishness is actually a key detail which subtly hints at future twists in the movie without you even realizing it yet. Also, I might as well mention his hilariously oversized code box now, and how it represents his ego, since I won't really have much to say about that later scene other than this. On another note, King Candy is the person who's currently in control of this racing game. A game which he wants to be chosen in every race played on it. This is an important yet overlooked hint to his secrets later revealed. Meanwhile, Felix meets up with Calhoun of the Hero's Duty game, who decides to head out and find Ralph in Sugar Rush, but she doesn't want to take Felix with her. This relates to her ultra-traumatic backstory, where her fiancé was killed at her wedding, which is what created her intense hatred of the cybugs. Also, Calhoun's fiancé is the only time I can remember in a modern Disney movie where they actually showed someone dying on screen, though it is very brief. Calhoun can't stop dwelling on the past. She is afraid to let people help her because she doesn't want them to get hurt. Whereas, if she only puts herself in danger, then no one else can get hurt. However, because she pushes people away, she ends up coming off as cold and jerkish, even though she really does care underneath. But Felix does manage to convince her anyway. So, together they head off to find Ralph. Calhoun's arc also ties into the main theme of acceptance this movie has, but in a unique way. More on her later. Well, back to Ralph. He learns from old High and Mighty here that only the winner of the race can get his stolen medal back, once more reinforcing this idea of heroes getting medals. So, Ralph goes searching for someone to win the race for him, but he finds a bully fest instead, and because Ralph is actually a decent person, despite his flawed worldview, he shoos them off. But he is far from done. He still has business with Miss Thief here, but Vanellope tries to make a deal with Ralph, because all she ever wanted was to be a normal racer like everyone else, but has so far been denied that by the rest of the world, just because she is different, because she has a glitch. Another interesting note, Vanellope claims not to have a glitch, but just dyslexia, which is actually a pretty clever nod to the real-world disability dyslexia, which in some ways is kind of similar to Vanellope's glitch. And many people with real-world dyslexia are often bullied as well, though as we'll see later, this supposed flaw is actually a gift in disguise, subtly sending a positive message to everyone who can relate to Vanellope's conditions. Anywho, Ralph is upset at all these extra steps he has to take to get his medal back, and decides to blow out his anger on a jawbreaker. And hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, I wouldn't mind if you smash the like button as hard as Ralph smashed that jawbreaker. Meanwhile, Felix reveals how ignorant he has been to Ralph's feelings this whole time by explaining that he doesn't understand why Ralph would do such a thing as going turbo. Calhoun in return wonders what going turbo exactly is supposed to mean. So, Felix at last explains the infamous tale of the game jumper. Turbo became a villain because he was selfish and wanted more in life, rather than learning to be content and accept his place. And Felix is afraid Ralph might just become like Turbo, and he isn't too far off from the truth. More on Turbo later, of course. Unfortunately, Felix and Calhoun accidentally make the same mistake Ralph did when he first entered Sugar Rush, but with no easy way out this time. Calhoun uses her quick thinking and careful planning to determine the situation, but she currently has no plan of escape. Felix, on the other hand, panics and needs to be calmed down by Calhoun. But, in return, he comes up with an out-of-the-box plan, which only he could be able to pull off because of his hammer. Together, they end up using their unique talents to escape the pit, showing just how well they work as a team, and how they can improve each other as people. But enough with the goo-goo eyes. Back to Ralph. So, Ralph and Vanellope head over to make a new car to replace the, unfortunate incident of a car that she previously had. Unfortunately, things don't end up going so well when Ralph tries to help out and make the new car. But, in a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, Vanellope loves it! This is the first time Ralph has ever been thanked or praised for his work, something he thought could only be a bad thing. He never realized the value his unique skills actually had until this point. But old Doofus Head shows up, and unfortunately they have to make a quick getaway. Off to the secret bonus level it is. Oh, and by the way, I like that Vanellope actually has a greater knowledge of the game world than even King Candy does. Yet another subtle hint at the upcoming twists. Inside the mountain, Ralph once more vents his frustration when Vanellope reveals she can't actually drive. but she assures him that there is still a chance. She can feel it in her code. Seems like it might be another hint. Vanellope has already started to grow attached to Ralph after all that has happened. Him saving her from the bullies and helping her make a new car. All this being more than anyone else has ever done for her before. But Ralph is a bit more hesitant. He believes if it weren't for Vanellope, he would be being praised as a hero already, though he too starts to see her as a friend after helping her learn to drive. The bond between Ralph and Vanellope works so well because, despite being video game characters, they feel like genuine people who have a rocky but realistic friendship. They may be very different, but the personalities just mix perfectly, and they know they need each other, as each one was worse off before they met. They both also share similar misconceptions of the world and their place in it, both believing themselves to be outcasts who have to prove their worth, when in reality, both are one of their respective games' most important elements. While all this is happening, Felix makes his biggest mistake yet, complimenting a woman. This causes Calhoun to boot him from her ship, since she is still not ready to move on and is too afraid to lose Felix. And though it makes her seem jerkish, she really secretly cares about him, and it was actually her feelings for him that caused her to abandon him. Felix is heartbroken, not even realizing that now he feels the same way Ralph did at the beginning of the film. Now we reach what is probably the most iconic and important part of the whole movie. I'm sure you all know exactly what I'm talking about. Ralph's betrayal. But just before all that, Vanellope, realizing she has found a true friend in Ralph, something even more valuable than winning the race, makes a special candy medal for Ralph. Unfortunately, while she was doing that, King Candy stops on by to pull out quite possibly the cleverest villain manipulation scene in any Disney animated movie. But first, my favorite scene in the movie.
You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would you? You hit a guy with glasses. Well played.
Anyway, King Candy has with him Ralph's long-lost medal, offering it in return for nothing but advice. Ralph is hesitant to trust him, and for good reason. But King Candy is sly. He uses special weapons called facts, logic, and half-truths to trick Ralph. You see, what makes this scene so brilliant is that King Candy is right. Everything he said is a genuinely possible outcome, an outcome which could spell doom for Vanellope. Ralph, now filled with fear, decides to do what he thinks is best for Vanellope and her game. When Vanellope returns, she gives Ralph the medal she made, and Ralph looks at it and thinks about what he's going to do, and how he doesn't deserve such a gift. Inevitably, Ralph and pins Vanellope up so that she can't stop him. And in this moment, Ralph becomes the very thing he always thought he was. The one thing Vanellope never saw in him. The villain. And now, even Vanellope believes that is what he truly is. Her hopes crushed forever. Ralph leaves with the illusion that this is for the better. But hey, at least he's got his medal, am I right? Because that's what's really important. Right? But when Ralph finally returns to his game to claim his reward, there is no one left. His choice to abandon his role as the villain has caused the game to be set for unplugging. The last remaining Nicelander keeps his promise and gives Ralph everything he said he wanted before leaving himself. But what Ralph thought he wanted was not actually what he needed all along. Ralph at last realizes that getting a medal isn't really what he wanted, nor has it made him happy. But rather, what he had, a friend in Vanellope, that was when he truly felt complete. The medal wasn't even earned fairly, and it only caused him and everyone else trouble wherever he went searching for it. But the friendship he had with Vanellope, he earned just by being himself. Ralph tosses the medal, and with it, his false worldview. And when he does so, he finally sees the truth. Literally, Vanellope is a part of her game. King Candy was wrong, and that means she isn't really a glitch. She is an equally valid part of her world and deserves to be given a chance just like everyone else. Seeing this, Ralph realizes that it isn't too late to save the one thing that truly gave his life meaning, his friend, and make it up. Ralph rushes back to Sugar Rush, finding Sour Bill and interrogating him to find the truth. After some convincing, Sour Bill reveals what he knows, and that the rest can be learned if Vanellope crosses the finish line and restores herself to the game. Also, another quick note, Sour Bill briefly mentions that the game will reset when Vanellope crosses the finish line. This is surprisingly important, actually, so keep it in mind for later. Ralph then literally tries to fix the damage he has done, but he only knows one person who can actually do that. Of course, I'm talking about Felix, who has unfortunately found himself in a precarious position. While trying to escape King Candy's Fungin, Felix realizes another truth, that there are many things Ralph can do that he can't, like wreck things. When Ralph shows up, Felix complains about being rejected, everything going wrong, and that he wasn't respected by anyone. Only for Ralph to then explain that is exactly how he felt all his life. Felix then realizes that he's misjudged Ralph, and this whole mess is partly his fault by not respecting him or considering his feelings when he should have. So he decides to make it up by helping Ralph fix his mistake by putting Vanellope's cart back together. Ralph then frees Vanellope and apologizes, admitting his misguided mistake. But thankfully, Vanellope is forgiving, and Ralph reveals that there is still a chance for her. She can be restored to who she should be by crossing the finish line of the race. With all bonds restored, Ralph sets up Vanellope to finally complete her dreams. But little does everyone know, the Cybugs are festering, ready to consume. The race goes pretty well with Vanellope, but King Candy is not having any of it, and he at last shows his true colors. He will do anything to put himself on top. Sharing the spotlight is his worst fear. In the process, though, he accidentally reveals that he is in fact a hypocrite. And also Turbo, I guess. Okay, one sec, let me elaborate. What I mean is that King Candy has always hated Vanellope and talked down to her supposedly because she was glitched. But in reality, so is King Candy, as we see him glitch into his true self, Turbo. So, King Candy's hatred of glitches is a facade made up just to pick on someone who stands out from the rest, when in reality, he is no different from her. Well, I mean, he's much eviler, but you get my point, right? The twist that King Candy is in fact Turbo actually works, unlike most of the many unsuccessful Disney twist villains to come after him. The main reasons why this twist works and others like, say, Hans, don't, are 1. Because the plot doesn't rely on the twist. Whether King Candy is Turbo or not, the plot still makes sense. 2, the twist itself actually makes sense, as in, many Disney twist villains just suddenly come out of nowhere and with seemingly all new personalities, but King Candy is consistent, and his motives are not only unchanged, but lined up perfectly with what we know about Turbo. And 3, it adds to the world and characters, unlike other twists, which only really exist for shock value. King Candy being Turbo makes both characters retroactively more interesting and engaging, as now the main villain has a backstory, and Turbo isn't just that guy from the backstory. Everything comes full circle, making the plot feel more complete, the sign of a true masterpiece. Anyway, enough of King Candy, the climax has only just begun. Vanellope escapes using the very ability people taunted her for in the past, and gets this close to becoming a part of the code again. But, unfortunately, Calhoun and the Cybugs return. Well, I mean, it's a good thing that Calhoun is here, but not the Cybugs. Everyone makes a break for it, but Vanellope can't leave because she was cut off from finishing the race before she could be restored. Ralph tries to help her, but he can't force her out. But hey, when did a wall ever stop Ralph?
Swiffer Duster traps 4 times more dust. 4 clean even Mom approves of.
That reach.
Making hard to reach.
So easy.
Swiffer. Wow. The mother of all cleans. Love it or your money back.
Okay, actually this one does. But that still doesn't stop him, as he finds another way, using his unique mix of knowledge, being reminded of the beacon by Calhoun, and the soda mountain which he knows can explode like a beacon. He rushes to save Vanellope, and furthermore, all of Sugar Rush. Also, King Candy briefly reappears for a boss fight, and honestly, not much to say here, other than I guess it adds tension? Is it weird to say this boss fight here might be the weakest scene in the movie? And not because it's bad, just because it might be the only thing that doesn't really add to the plot, themes, or characters in any way. But that's besides the point. Ralph finally knows what really matters, his friends, and he is willing to sacrifice his life for them. he finally embraces his role and gifts as the villain, realizing that what the villains from the beginning said was right all along. As he falls, possibly to his death, he recites what those same villains said at the beginning of the movie about the value of their roles. Getting a medal is never what made anybody a hero. But at this moment, Ralph finally does become a hero, but only when he at last accepts that he is the villain, poetically tying up his story arc. See? I told you that first villain scene would be important. But Vanellope won't just sit there as Ralph commits heroic suicide, so she rushes out to save him. And if it weren't for her special gift, which she had looked down upon for so long, she wouldn't have been able to save him. With the Cybugs destroyed, and King Candy as well, Vanellope can finally cross the fixed finish line and reset the game, restoring herself. All the damage being undone may seem like a convenient way to have everything fixed right before the ending, since the game needs to function when the arcade opens or else it'll get unplugged. But Sour Bill actually said this exact thing would happen earlier. Like I've been saying, nothing in this movie is pointless or unimportant, even the seemingly small details. At this moment, Vanellope is revealed to actually be the Princess of Sugar Rush, but she quickly abandons that title. She has learned, and so has Ralph, that pretending to be something you're not is a mistake. All she needed was a chance to show who she really is, and crossing that finish line finally brought her to everyone's view. Furthermore, Vanellope being trapped in Sugar Rush until this moment could be seen as her feeling useless in the greater world, but when she finally realizes her value and stops looking at her glitch as a mistake that needs to be fixed, that is when she is finally free, when she can finally take her place in the greater world. She also forgives all the people who bullied her, proving that despite her rough exterior, she is actually nice, though she does have a quick laugh first.
Executed? What?
And Calhoun at last realizes that she doesn't want to leave Felix. She is happier with him, finally overcoming her past and accepting it for what it is. At last, we reach the true ending of the movie, where the main theme of acceptance ties into all the character arcs and endings. Firstly, with Ralph, as he of course learns that his role is equally important and valid as anyone else's, and that he doesn't need to change himself or prove some point to fit in. Ralph learns that accepting his role and letting go of jealousy is actually what makes him the happiest and most content. And when the Nicelanders and Felix realize this as well, they too are happier, not having to live in fear of a man who never actually intended them harm. Ralph even takes his new and improved worldview and uses it to help other abandoned game characters. Felix and the Nicelanders learn to see the value of Ralph and his position as a villain, though it takes viewing a world without him and seeing things through his eyes to finally get it. Vanellope learns to accept who she is as a person, and to not let the world tell you who to be, or change yourself to try and fit in with what it wants you to be. Earlier in the movie, Ralph, still in his flawed worldview, tells Vanellope that people love a winner, and that is why she'll be loved in the end. Though Vanellope is loved in the end, it is because of who she is, not because she is a winner. And Calhoun learns to accept her past and move on, or else she will never be able to retain any relationships or ever be able to love anyone ever again, even though deep inside, that is what she truly needs. All of them are challenged in their worldviews until they eventually realize they were wrong and change for the better. Unlike King Candy, who shut people out and tried to take all the attention for himself, never learning to accept his place because of jealousy. Every plot thread and character in this movie is so intricately tied together, and the writers made sure to fill in every single plot hole, as well as cleverly, but not too obviously, hint and foreshadow the events yet to come. Quite possibly the most beautiful part of the ending isn't when Ralph is finally accepted by Felix and the Nicelanders, or even when he gets to see Vanellope. It is actually when Ralph learns to love the very thing he thought he hated most. No, not being thrown off the roof. I'm referring to him learning to love and accept himself for who he is. There is no one else in the world who can do what he can do, and that is because there's no one else in the whole world just like him. And that, my friends, is why Disney's Wreck-It Ralph is an impeccably and perfectly written modern masterpiece of a movie. A very big thank you to everyone who made it to the end of this analysis. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you subscribed, and why not leave a like while you're at it? And also be sure to tell me in the comments down below what you think of Wreck-It Ralph. Love it? Hate it? All opinions are welcome, so be sure to share. Oh, and another thing to share would be the video. We need to inform the rest of the world how great this movie is. And, most importantly of all, stay iconic.
Kinetic sand splash! All new color-changing sand splash!
Originally, I had set out to make a video on Monsters, Inc., but before I rewatched Monsters, Inc., I decided I should also rewatch Monsters University, you know, because I'm just a bit of a completionist and I like to watch movies in order if there's multiple of them. And I thought maybe there might be something in Monsters University that I'd like to mention in my Monsters, Inc. review. However, I had forgotten just how good Monsters University actually is, and I kept thinking throughout the movie about how much stuff I wanted to say about this movie, so much so to the point that I realized I had to make a video on Monsters University as well. And since it chronologically comes first, I thought I'd do the video on this movie first. One statement about this movie that I've always found to be relatively true and agreed with is the oft brought up idea that this is Pixar's most underrated movie. But I don't just think it's their most underrated movie, I also think that this is an underappreciated masterpiece. Monsters University is one of Pixar's most personal, profound, and sad movies, yet at the same time, one of their most fun, inspirational, and rewatchable movies. And of course, as usual, all this comes down to a variety of different factors. Of course, the parts that I think make this movie such a masterpiece is most of the stuff relating to Mike and Sully's character arcs. But before I get into all that, let me talk about a few of the other reasons that make it a masterpiece, because even movies that have great themes and deep morals and all that aren't guaranteed to be a masterpiece just because of that. You have to have the rest of the movie back you up as well. And this movie definitely succeeds in all those categories. One of the first things anyone should notice that this movie does great is one of my favorite parts about that movie, and in fact will be a huge portion of my video on that movie when I eventually make it, so I won't spend too much time talking about it here. But I do want to mention that this movie does just about as good of a job as the original, although perhaps a bit less clever than the original. It still adds lots of creative and unique things to this world that expand upon what we saw in the original movie and fits perfectly with it. This is best showcased by the scene where Mike walks into Monsters University for the first time and looks around everything. I especially love how there's a whole underwater area for underwater-related monsters, which is a neat bit of world building since underwater monsters was something that was basically completely untouched upon in the original movie, but is a logical addition to the world. Then there's the comedy. While it may not be as funny as the original Monsters, Inc., Monsters University definitely has its fair share of laughs. There are so many great comedic scenes sprinkled throughout this movie, and some of them do even give the original movie a run for its money in the comedy department, such as the library sequence. The soundtrack for this movie is also really great, but I mean, it's pretty hard to go wrong with Randy Newman. Unless it's Toy Story 4, where you basically just reuse all the same music from the older movies, but all the other Randy Newman soundtracks are great. This movie in general is just really entertaining. It's really well paced and fun to watch, and that's part of what makes it so rewatchable. And now, with all that out of the way, we can finally talk about all the deep and profound moments of this movie, which there are a surprising amount of. The primary aspect of this movie that makes it so good is, of course, the dynamic between Mike and Sully. Mike and Sully are probably two of the greatest characters ever invented in the history of cinema, and in my opinion, they're just as good in this movie as they were in the original. And it's not just because they make such a great comedic duo, but also because they have a really excellent story to be told in this movie. Now, at first, it may seem like a simple two guys don't like each other, but eventually they become best friends by the end type of plot. But this one is particularly well executed, and there is so much more to it than a simple best friends storyline. Firstly, I like how Mike and Sully don't like each other at first, not necessarily because they think each other is annoying, although they do kind of think that, but also, and more importantly, because they have a pre-established biases towards who they think they will like and who they won't like. Mike and Sully come from completely different worlds. Mike is a small-time monster who believes in hard work and has been bullied all throughout his life, whereas Sully thinks he's a cool guy because his father is famous, and he thinks that that automatically means that he should be treated with respect, despite not having earned that respect. However, of course, he does have some issues deep down that isn't much to talk about, which we'll get to in a bit. By default, Mike sees Sully with a negative perspective because Sully resembles many of the people who bullied him in the past, and Sully sees Mike with a negative perspective because to him he just seems like a nobody who could never be on the same level as him or other more famous and noteworthy people. Of course, this inevitably leads to a rivalry between the two, which ultimately escalates in an event that causes them to be dropped from the scaring program. And of course, this is where the story gets interesting, since of course in order to gain a second chance, Mike is forced to work with his arch nemesis Sully and to win the scare games. But one thing I like about Mike being forced to work with Sully is that he thinks that he doesn't really need him to win the scare games, that he can essentially do everything himself, missing the entire point of it being a team in the first place. And Sully isn't much different either. This is of course a big problem because you have to work as a team in order to win the scare games, the only way to get back into the scaring program. And the rest of Mike's team is not exactly in ship-shape form. Mike put everyone on his team on his own shoulders, making it an impossible task. This of course is best showcased in one of my favorite scenes of the movie, the glow urchin toxicity scare games scene. And not only because it's a hysterically funny sequence, but I really like how the movie doesn't explicitly tell you that the game requires teamwork in order to win, but rather implies so by how every other team is planning to work together and giving each other good advice. Meanwhile, in Uzma Campa, Mike and Sully are challenging each other as to who will actually be the one to cross the finish line first, completely missing the point of teamwork in the first place.
Take that, Wazowski!
Are you Bolivians? I beat you!
The final segment of this scene is perfect. Mike and Sully cross the finish line, so pleased at themselves, believing each other to have beaten the other in the race, only to realize that neither of them won anything at all, as they were so focused on beating each other that they left their entire team behind and crossed the finish line last. But of course, thanks to a miracle, they get a second chance at their second chance. And through the events of the scare games, Mike and Sully, of course, are forced to confront all of their flawed perspectives and come to terms with each other, realizing that they're not actually so bad after all. And when they work together, they're significantly more successful at what they do. I really like stories in which the two best friends are only as good of best friends as they are because they had a troubled past. These types of stories work really well, in my opinion, because the two main characters had to overcome their flaws in order to become the best friends they are now, which means that it is even harder to break them apart than other best friends who have not yet encountered each other's flaws yet, as those flaws might tear down their relationships, whereas these relationships are stronger because they prove those flaws don't matter and that they can be better than the worst of themselves. But as good as the bonding friendship between Mike and Sully is, that isn't what makes this movie a masterpiece on its own. The real reason that I call this movie a masterpiece, and the thing that pushes it over the edge into that category for me, is the movie's themes and messages about the hard truths of reality. And what do I mean by that? Well, to begin, let us go back to Mike's character arc. His separate character arc from the growing friendship with Sully, that is. The desire that got him here in the first place, and what ultimately caused his rivalry in the first place. I'm of course referring to his dreams of becoming a scarer. Ever since Mike was a kid, he wanted to become a scarer because he saw them as the coolest people in the entire universe, and he witnessed firsthand just what they can do, and how important they are to society. And from that moment forward, he planned his entire life around becoming a scarer. And of course, another problem Mike has had throughout his entire life is that everyone keeps telling him that he's not scary, he's not good enough. But every time someone says this, it does not convince Mike to change his mind. It only adds more fuel to the fire. It also doesn't help that Sully also thinks Mike is not scary. Mike has worked hard every single day to get what he wants, to eventually go to Monsters University and learn to become a true scarer. And he believes that if you put in all the hard work and study better than anyone else, that you will succeed.
And this is, of course, why Sully bothers him so much at first. Because he sees Sully as a cheater, someone who is given everything in their life, who can climb his way to the top with no hard work at all, just based on the reputation of his family. And this, of course, causes Mike to become so over-determined to prove that Sully isn't good enough and that he's better because he put in all the work, and Sully in return, trying to outdo him, is of course what causes them to get dropped from the class. Because their own selfish desires became more important than the actual work and studying they were supposed to be doing in the first place. But the thing that hits Mike harder than being dropped from the class is that he's told by a professional scarer, the type of people he looked up to, that he isn't scary. But Mike is too far into his idea of becoming a scarer that he still refuses to accept what anyone says, and he boldly claims that he will prove Dean Hardscrabble wrong, that he will surprise her. Dean Hardscrabble, of course, is quick to press X to doubt, but at this point, she knows that nothing she says will ever stop Mike, and that only time can tell. Though she'll probably be right. Over the course of the scare games, Mike seems to have his idea that he can be a good scarer backed up, and soon he shall prove to all the world that he is a true scarer. But there is one challenge remaining. If Mike cannot do a good scare in the final game, their team will surely lose. And everything they've worked so hard for up until this point will have been for naught. Deep down, Sully knows that Mike isn't really scary, but he doesn't want to either tell Mike that he's not scary and potentially ruin their friendship, nor does he want to let down all the rest of the Uzma Campa team who've done so well and genuinely prove him that they have it in them to be scarers. So he makes the misguided decision to cheat in order for their team to win. When Mike goes in to complete the final scaring challenge and succeeds with the most scare energy of anyone in the entire challenge, was to him quite possibly the greatest moment in his entire life up until that point. Which is, of course, what makes the very next scene so crushing and heartbreaking, not only for him, but for us, the audience, as well. As soon as Mike discovers that Sully cheated, and his scare was only successful because Sully cheated, Mike is devastated. Firstly, because now he believes himself to be a liar, and that he's not really accomplished anything at all. His big moment of proving himself was fake, which in his eyes robbed him of the true chance of proving himself, since he still believes that there's a chance that he really is scary. But also, and arguably more devastating, it revealed to him that Sully had lied when he said that he thought he was a good scarer. All throughout Mike's life, everyone had been telling him that he isn't scary, and all it did was make him want to be scarier even more. And everyone who told him he wasn't scary was someone that he had a disdain for, even Sully at first. But that moment when Sully said that he thought he was a good scarer was a moment that proved to Mike that Sully was his friend now, because he had changed his mind and seen the truth, that he really was a good scarer. But of course, that wasn't really the truth. And Sully, despite being his friend now, even willing to cheat to try and help him get what he wants, still didn't believe that he was a good scarer. But Mike's hard-coded belief that he is a good scarer now causes him to abandon Sully, because Sully has gone back to the dark side in his mind. No true friend of his would ever say he isn't scary. Only his enemies, those he must prove wrong. Of course, Sully now knows that he made a big mistake by cheating, and he tries to reconcile this by admitting the truth to Dean Hardscrabble. And this is pretty much the pinnacle of Sully's character development in this movie. Not only has he learned to value others instead of just trying to do things on his own, but he has now come to a point where he's willing to sacrifice all his hopes and dreams just so that they can still complete theirs. Unfortunately for Mike, though, his dreams have turned into dangerous ambitions, as he is now so determined to prove that he is right that he breaks into the door and enters the first door he sees without even realizing how dangerous it actually is. Sully, of course, hears about Mike's adventures in the human world and quickly rushes to save him. As he understands the type of danger Mike is in, Mike doesn't, because he thinks that if something goes wrong, he can just scare everyone and make a break for it. But Sully, of course, knows that he isn't scary, and if something goes wrong, he'll likely be kidnapped or killed. The scenes that take place in the human world are the peak of Monsters University, the defining moments that make this movie the masterpiece that it truly is, the cherry on top of the sundae. But they're also some of the most heartbreaking and realistic scenes in cinematic history. It takes a really powerful, emotional, or moving scene in a movie to make me cry, but even I had a hard time not getting watery eyes while watching these scenes. When Mike does enter the human world and tries to prove himself by scaring the kid behind the door, not only does he realize that he's way in over his head, as this is not just a simple kid's bedroom, but his attempt at being scary backfires so badly that not only are the kids not scared of him, they actually laugh at him. Instead of Mike scaring the kids, Mike himself is the one who becomes afraid in this situation. But he's too heartbroken to ever go back, because that would be admitting that he was wrong, and everyone he always criticized for saying that he wasn't scary would be proven right. Eventually Sully shows up and finds Mike. He's in a state of depression, sitting alone, questioning his entire existence up until this point. Every single thing Mike ever believed is thrown into question. Not only has Mike been proven wrong that he isn't really scary after all, but he also seems to have been proven wrong in his idea that through hard work, you can do anything. As he's done all the hard work, he put in all the effort, and still he failed. And worst yet, this has been his dream for almost his entire life. The thing he has dedicated the most time to. The thing that had become so important to him that he had even shut out other people and other prospects just to focus more on being the best scarer possible. At this point, Mike feels as though his life has been virtually meaningless. Everything he ever did was for nothing. An unachievable dream. The most tragic part of all this is that it's Mike's own fault. Not that he had a dream, or that he did all this hard work, but that he tunnel visioned himself so hard into believing that this is what he should be and what he should do, that he cut out all other options. Throughout his life, he shut down any argument against his ideas or plans, living in a world where the only things he accepted were things that confirmed his own biases and opinions. But of course, the problem with this lies in the classic phrase, putting all your eggs in one basket. But now, Mike has dropped the proverbial basket with all his eggs in the one basket. Mike figures there's no point in going back because his life is worthless. Nothing he ever did had any point to it. But thankfully, Sully realizes that the reason Mike doesn't want to go back is because he now sees himself as a complete failure. Sully knows, however, that Mike isn't the only failure in the world, as deep down, he has been hiding from him and everyone else the fact that he sees himself as a failure. He's lazy, selfish, and a letdown to his family's name. For all his life, he believed that he was special for being a Sullivan, the son of a famous scarer, and that made him special. However, he slowly started to realize that being special isn't all it's cut out to be, as now all of a sudden, he has the greatest weight on his shoulder to live up to what everyone expects from him, and that pressure is too much that he ends up doing pretty much the exact opposite. Instead of doing everything to live up to the name of the Sullivans, he ends up doing nothing because the pressure is too much. But sometimes, all it takes to keep moving on in the world is knowing that you're not alone. And Mike now realizes that he isn't the only failure in the world, and that if Sully won't give up despite all his failings, then neither should he. And this is of course when we get quite possibly the single greatest scene in the entirety of the Monsters, Inc. franchise, Mike and Sully's big scare. Despite the fact that Mike was unable to be a true scarer, that doesn't mean his entire life was meaningless up until this point. Because even if he himself can't use that knowledge of scaring that he learned and worked so hard to master, someone else, someone who lacks all that knowledge, still can. And so, by using each other's strengths to patch each other's weaknesses, Mike and Sully are able to create the biggest scare in the entire Monsters universe, of which they have to get back to the Monsters world because the door was shut off from the other side. And this of course brings us to the final scenes of the movie, in which Mike and Sully are both expelled for their technically criminal offenses, but Dean Hardscrabble reappears to have one final word with the two before they leave. And it's here that she reveals that Mike actually succeeded in what he set out to do. He surprised her, but not in the way that he had first set out to do. You see, Mike succeeded in surprising Dean Hardscrabble not by being a great scarer, as he claimed he would be, but by managing to beat her scaring record. Despite that, by working together, something that most monsters hadn't realized up until that point. And just as Mike is about to leave and go his separate ways from Monsters University, Sully, and everyone else, Sully stops him, knowing that if they part and go their separate ways, that neither of them will ever achieve the true potential that they can reach. Sully has what it takes to be a scarer, but he doesn't have the knowledge required to become a successful scarer. Mike has all that knowledge, and without him, they wouldn't have escaped the human world. In fact, Sully likely believes that Mike has a better chance at success than he does. He tells Mike that he's the true talented one, and that he's just riding off his greatness. And Mike realizes that with Sully's help, that he might actually be able to achieve a position close to what he wanted in the first place, even if it's not exactly the role he set out to play. And through hard work and determination, and many jobs, the two of them eventually climb the ranks to where we find them at the beginning of Monsters, Inc. And there you have Pixar's underrated masterpiece. But don't go just yet, as I still have one more thing to explain, that being the main message of the movie, as I just wanted to clarify as clearly as possible why it's so great. And very important. In fact, dare I say, this is one of the most important movies to show anyone. And I just mean anyone in general, because it pretty much applies to everyone. The message of this movie is kind of similar to Wreck-It Ralph's, which I covered in a previous video, in that everyone has value in their unique positions in the world. However, that movie covers it from the perspective of someone who's disrespected despite being good at what they do. Whereas this movie is about someone who wants to be good at something, but can't because they don't have the talent in order to become good at that. You see, every human, or monster in this movie's case, is designed differently. We're all made different, with different interests and different talents and different abilities, different skill levels at varying different things, and we all have dreams. Different dreams. However, many people are tricked into the illusion that some jobs and positions in the world are more important and valuable than others, and that if you have a lesser job, you are a lesser person. This is the trap that Mike falls into in the movie, believing that in order to be special, you have to be a scarer, and that if you're anything less than a scarer, you're not as good. A common equivalent in the real world would be an actor. Many people dream of being actors, but not everyone can be an actor. Even if you complete all the classes and do all the hard work and learn everything there is to know about being a great actor, you still might not be a good actor, simply because you don't have the talent to become an actor. And it's not because you are an untalented individual. It is just that you do not have the skill set needed to become an actor. In fact, some jobs that people look down upon could be argued to be more important than these popular jobs like acting. Acting is just entertainment. Being famous isn't all it's cut out to be. Without teachers and historians, people would forget the past. And of course, as they say, we'd then be doomed to repeat it. Just because we can't all achieve our dreams doesn't mean you are a failure. Everyone is talented and skilled at something, so stop dwelling on what you can't do, and instead be thankful for all the skills you do have, all the things that you can do that no one else can.
Well, here we are at the end of the video as always, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to squeeze that like button and tell me what you thought about Monsters University in the comments down below. If you're interested in supporting me, I have a link to my Patreon in the description, and of course, if you're interested in my other content, I have a Toy Story 2 review that you could also check out if you're in a Pixar mood still, or maybe you're more interested in Pirates of the Caribbean. I have a video where I talk about why On Stranger Tides is not actually that bad and is pretty good. But, most importantly of all, stay iconic.
It's officially summer vacation!
Return to Unicorn Island for a legendary summer.
This my Toy Story 2 video for me to say that this is actually even better. In fact, it's one of those impeccably perfect movies that are so good, it's difficult to pin down a good starting point. However, I hope that by the end of this video, you too will also realize just how outstanding this movie is. But before we can talk about these fictional monsters, we first have to talk about the real monsters. All the big companies and corporations that are always spying on you and collecting your data with their websites. But fear not, Atlas VPN is here to help you stop all that. With their private networks, your data will always be protected. For just $1.83 a month, plus 3 free bonus months, Atlas VPN will stop companies from collecting and using your personal data, blocking unwanted ads and malware, and ensuring your personal data stays private. So now you can search for whatever you want on Google without having your data be tracked. But that's far from the only feature that Atlas VPN offers. Atlas VPN can also detect if your email has been breached and sends you warnings about websites where your personal information may be at risk.
Nice.
Additionally, you can also use Atlas VPN to change your virtual location. By doing this, companies will no longer be able to track where you live. This also allows you to bypass all those pesky region locks on certain websites. Say you're a citizen of the US, but you're taking a summer vacation to a different country. What if your favorite show is on Netflix only in the US? Well, no problem. Just switch your Atlas VPN virtual location, and now you can access all your favorite shows. Atlas VPN offers more features than other VPN services and at a better price. And make sure to use the special link below to get an 82% off discount. What are you waiting for? Get Atlas VPN right now so you can protect your data from big corporations and get access to all their useful and helpful features. And now, back to the video. I think the best place to start with a movie like this is at the conceptual level. The very idea of this movie is genuinely one of the most clever concepts I have ever heard. Essentially, they have taken the idea of monsters hiding in your closet and asked the question, what if there really are monsters in the closet that come from another world? But not just that, they take it even further, asking, what if those monsters weren't scaring kids because they're evil, but rather they were simply doing their job? Not only are these questions the basis for a fantastic and unique world and story, but they also completely change our perspective on how we see doors, since that is how monsters get here. It's almost as ingenious as how Toy Story, especially the second one, makes us question the existence and potential lives and feelings of our toys. However, I find that despite the Toy Story movies having a more thought-provoking concept, Monsters, Inc. has the overall better world building. Because Toy Story is set in the real world, all the writers had to do was show the world from the toys' perspectives and make up some rules about how things work. But Monsters, Inc., on the other hand, is set in an entirely unique world, separate from our reality. And yet, despite that, it feels just as fleshed out as something like the world of Toy Story. All the ideas behind this world are pure genius. Since the basic idea was to make a movie about the monsters in the closet that scare kids, the first question would obviously be, why? From that very question right there, we got one of the greatest fictional worlds ever devised. Having the world run by scream energy is another genius idea, because it justifies the fact that these monsters scare kids. Otherwise, we would be left conflicted if they only did it for fun or sport. The fact that scaring kids is just the usual 9 to 5 for these characters is a great way of allowing us to relate to them on a basic level. Plus, the working system of this world is actually quite interesting and in-depth as well. Not all monsters scare kids. Only some do, the top dogs, the scariest ones. Whilst other monsters run fairly average jobs. They run news outlets, restaurants, cleaning services, you name it. It helps to ground this world in a sense of realism. Despite its crazy shenanigans, these guys aren't so different from us. And because it isn't too different from our universe, it also prevents us from having our suspension of disbelief broken several times. Like with questions such as, how can Boo breathe if this is a different universe? But we don't have to worry about that, because the two worlds share a lot in common that the fundamental questions like that don't really pop up into anyone's heads. Additionally, there are so many details put into this world that it makes it much more fleshed out and realized than most other fictional worlds. Such as how Mike and Sully's apartment has 2 different door sizes for both of them, and other monsters as well, assumedly. And the same goes for different cars and different apartment sizes on the streets. Or for all the monster and scary themed organizations in this world, such as the newspaper publications. And those are just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even mentioned how the stoplight says stalk instead of walk, or how they use odorant instead of deodorant. We haven't even mentioned the character designs yet, which are also top-notch and able to stand out greatly compared to most other animated movies in general, due to the theme of monsters being highly varied. And I also wanted to give a special mention to how well the animators make each character stand out in their movements alone. For example, Sully has a heavy but soft, casual walk, perfectly fitting his strong but relaxed personality, whereas Mike is a bit more jumpy and bouncy in the way he moves, matching his more comedic personality and round ball shape. Then there's Randall, who is often slinking down and crawling, showing how he's a more lowly person, willing to break the rules to become the best, as well as his swift, snake-like shifty movements, perfectly portraying his dangerous and untrustworthy personality. I could go on, but we'd be here all day. But how about we look at a scene that perfectly encapsulates the amazing world building and also establishes our characters' personalities and motivations as well. I now present why Mike and Sully Walking to Work is one of the best established establishing scenes in cinematic history. No, really, I mean it. Firstly, this scene manages to show us an immense amount of world building in a very short span of time. This is where a lot of the points about the great world details I mentioned come from. But furthermore, it's a key element in establishing how relatively normal this world is, despite its crazy over-the-top inhabitants. Mike and Sully, despite being monsters from another dimension, share similar problems and annoyances to us normal people. They have to wake up early against their will, take a long hike to work, and cut back on power because of energy shortages. Problems that anyone can relate to. This allows us to be simultaneously entertained by the crazy characters, while also feeling relatively down to earth so that we can relate to Mike and Sully as average Joes on a personal level. And also, since we're at this part, I feel obligated to bring up the now infamous 4th grade line. Haters of the prequel movie Monsters University often cite this line as proof the prequel isn't canon. But first of all, that is an extremely stupid and petty reason to condemn an entire movie over. But also, there is a really easy headcanon fix that solves this problem. What if, now hear me out, the 4th grade in this universe is the equivalent of college? They never actually explain how the grading system works. 1st grade could be preschool, 2nd could be middle school, 3rd could be high school, and 4th college.
Boom, baby!
Problem solved. Oh, and speaking of Mike and Sully, this scene also does a great job of subtly revealing important traits about both of them as people without us, the audience, even realizing it. Sully is shown throughout this scene to be cool with everyone around here, letting us know how much reputation and goodwill he has gained. But despite that, he remains humble. In this way, we, the audience, don't hate him for being a completely self-obsessed jerk. A simple concept, I know, but somehow there are writers who think having your character act cool and be praised by everyone while simultaneously bragging about how great they are and claiming superiority is a recipe for a likable character. Of course, it's not. Anywho, Sully is also shown to care quite a bit about the scream shortage situation at hand, forcing Mike to walk to work so they can save on as much power as possible. This reflects his later actions of putting himself, his ego, and his personal comfort behind doing the right thing. On the flip side, you have Mike, a monster who is willing to do almost anything to reduce his workload while still getting the result that he wants, even if it does come at the cost of others. He is always trying to find the easy way out. But this is partly why he works so well with Sully, as Sully is able to keep his more selfish side in check. Mike is also shown to be salty and complain a little about not getting his way, just to rub it in. This too is important because it lines up with his constant downward spiral throughout the movie until he eventually realizes his selfish actions for what they are. Oh, and speaking of the Scream energy crisis, this scene does a great job adding to the very brief mention of the energy shortages earlier in the movie. This is a very important plot line in the film, which is cleverly told to us and expanded upon in the background. That way we get a good feeling for what everyone is talking about, but don't think too hard about it so that a certain later twist will be more shocking. But that isn't the only aspect of the Scream shortage found in this scene. There is also a Scream shortage newspaper, which tells us that blackouts are expected. This is a small but important detail, as it reveals to us just how big of a deal this is, and it allows us to better understand Sully's insistence on Mike not driving his car, as well as showing how careless Mike actually is regarding serious situations. Both important character details. They also have this paper appear on screen 2 or 3 times, and this is important for 2 reasons. One, it is important to ensure that we, the audience, see this detail, as it would be easier to miss if it was only seen once. And 2, this reinforces how important the Scream shortage is by having it be the headline of a major newspaper that is everywhere. Do you now see why I say this is one of the best establishing scenes in cinematic history? Something else related to the world building is the soundtrack, which is honestly one of the very best I've heard in any Pixar movie, only being challenged by The Incredibles, Toy Story 2, and Toy Story 3. Some of the reasons that make this soundtrack so great are that it's super catchy and stylish. It has that signature Randy Newman style, but also manages to sound distinct from all his other works as well. And that is probably because of one of the other major factors, that it is perfectly composed to fit the character's world and story. The music mixes bits of jazzy elements with more big and bombastic industrial sounding tunes. Industrial sounding tunes. It truly sounds like the theme of a bunch of eccentric workers. But for Boo, he has created a softer, more emotional theme that represents a side of this world that we don't see. I love how different Boo's theme is and how it contrasts with the rest of the soundtrack. It helps to slow down the pace a bit to show us the simpler things in life and let the emotions set in. And the contrast also helps to show how different Boo is from the rest of this crazy world. It's an astoundingly good soundtrack, and Randy Newman deserves every bit of praise. Did I mention this movie also has a really great plot? And almost everything great about the main plot is perfectly set up in the first few minutes of the movie. I saved talking about this scene till now because it has more to do with the plot than the world building. Of course, it still has a ton of great world building here, much of which is related to the plot, but it made more sense to talk about this stuff after the walking to work scene and whatnot. Anyway, the opening scene is simply perfection. I love how they make you believe that this is actually a child's room and that the monster here is truly dangerous, only for that monster to end up chickening out and everything turning out to have simply been a simulation the whole time. It's great to start this movie with a scene like this, not only because it showcases one of the main focuses of scaring kids for energy, but also because it establishes the constantly twisting and turning nature of the plot, subtly teaching us, the audience, not to take anything you see at face value. I furthermore love how they immediately introduce the idea that these monsters don't just scare kids on a whim. Scaring kids is more than just a job for these monsters. It's an art, something that has to be learned and perfected. Some monsters just aren't cut out for scaring. It just adds another layer of depth to this already great world. I mean, this one scene is basically so good that it's essentially what the entire concept of Monsters University is based on. Furthermore, we learn in this scene that monsters have a great fear of humans, and not only because of this wumbo here, but also because of how big of a deal they make of letting a human into the real world. This is the basis of the majority of the entire plot, as letting a human in is exactly what happens later. It lets us know how big of a deal it is when Boo actually shows up. It is also in this scene that we get introduced to the main villain of the movie, although we don't know it yet. And without us even realizing it, the movie has already started planting the seeds of his motivation, with how Water News explains that they desperately need the screen energy. And lastly, this very room here is the same room that Water News is defeated in during the climax of the movie, and Mike and Sully ultimately beat him using the same simulator here to lay their trap. This is perfectly poetic because it rounds out the movie nicely, bringing back something from the very start and also having Water News be defeated in the very same room that he first appeared on screen. So, as you can see, this opening sets up almost every major idea and moment that will happen throughout the rest of the plot, and all without ever feeling overstuffed. This is of course because a lot of the setup is being done without us, the audience, even realizing it. But what is the point of a good plot without great characters? It only makes sense to start with Sully, one of our protagonists, the debatably more important one. His personality is fairly basic, the cool guy who is very relaxed, but gets anxious when things go wrong. But ultimately, he is a reliable friend, and that's what counts the most. Of course, the main meat of Sully's character comes in the form of his attachment to Boo. At first, Sully is terrified of Boo and tries to get rid of her, but eventually he completely changes his mind and becomes her friend and protector instead, almost akin to a father in many aspects. Additionally, I like how Sully finding out that Boo isn't dangerous is a slow process and not a sudden realization. It's not only more realistic this way, since most people who have lived their whole lives believing something are not likely to instantly change their mind, but also because it allows for better character development for Sully, as his goal completely changes throughout the movie. All he cared about at first was beating the scare record and making enough energy to end the crisis, but Boo ends up teaching him that there are more important things than just doing your everyday job, especially if doing what you're supposed to puts someone else more vulnerable at risk. In the end, Sully realizes that humans being dangerous is bogus, and that if he lets the authorities get Boo, unthinkable things might happen, and thus he is willing to risk his reputation and everything he has in order to do the right thing. But unfortunately, in the process, he ends up treating Mike as less important because of their disagreements, and continues to place his ideas first, which, of course, is what causes their big, but brief, breakup near the end of the movie. While Sully is technically in the right, he could have tried harder to show Mike his perspective and work better with him as a team from the moment they found Boo. If they had done that, the two two of them would have been more successful. And then, of course, at the end, we get the infamous sad moment of this Pixar movie. Sully saying goodbye to Boo. Despite having just met, the two have already become like father and daughter. He was there for her when no one else was. And so, letting her go is more than just leaving someone he loves. It's about leaving her in a world where he won't be there. He worries for her like any good parent, and the idea that something might happen to her because he isn't there is the hardest part to overcome. But he knows that it has to be both for the good of their world and Boo eventually having to grow up and be on her own. But just as any parent has to let their kid go one day, that doesn't mean they'll never see them. And it is impossible not to smile in the final shot of this film. A simply beautiful moment. These emotional scenes manage to work so well in this mostly comedic movie because they are connected to the most consistently serious character. Additionally, the scene where he and Mike argue also works quite well because of the fact that their friendship is something we, the audience, have grown to care about. And these serious moments help to balance out the comedy of the movie to make it overall more well-rounded. But as great as Sully is, he will never be able to compete with the absolute legend that is Mike Wazowski. This green, punky little eyeball is almost certainly one of the greatest characters ever written. I've already discussed how amazing he is in the prequel movie Monsters University, but he is even better in this original movie.
I think I have a plan. Using mainly spoons, we dig a tunnel under the city and release it into the wild.
Despite being the main source of comic relief in this film, Mike actually has a lot of depth to him, and an excellent character arc as well. Mike is at heart a simple monster. He has a great job, a lovely girlfriend, and an amazing best friend. And when he works together with Sully, they are virtually unstoppable. And that point is actually quite important for the plot, so remember that. Throughout the movie, Mike acts mostly selfishly, trying to simply undo the situation that he and Sully have gotten into with Boo. However, his selfish actions are understandable and do make sense, as Boo's existence in their world is not his fault, and he is essentially being screwed over because of his connection to Sully. Mike is desperate not to lose everything he has worked so hard for, especially not when he and Sully are so close to making history, and if you throw Monsters University into the equation as well, it really exemplifies how much he's gone through to get to this point. Several times throughout the movie, Mike is almost able to end the catastrophe and shift the problem onto someone else's shoulders. But all this would come at the cost of Boo being abandoned or kidnapped. Mike couldn't care less though, because of the way his world has made everyone to believe humans are dangerous. So from Mike's perspective, his selfish actions actually seem quite reasonable. However, it is Mike's refusal to lose everything and work with Sully to help Boo that is the very reason they fail to make much progress at returning her, since they are only able to achieve greatness when they work together as a team. Like I said, them being a great team is quite relevant to the plot. Unfortunately, despite Mike's best efforts, Sully refuses to abandon Boo, and both of them get banished. And what ensues next would normally be an annoyance in most other movies: the big third act friends breakup scene. But Monsters Inc. manages to pull off this trope so well, you might not even realize it was a third act breakup in the first place. Unlike most other breakup scenes, this one isn't just thrown in for the sake of fake drama and tension to up the stakes or make it more emotional. Rather, this scene is a perfectly natural continuation of these characters' stories. Despite being Sully's best friend, Mike has been arguing with him about what to do to end this problem throughout the movie. And consistently, Mike's attempts to restore things to normal have been ignored and contradicted by Sully. And ultimately, it is Sully's plan that leads them to getting banished. This moment has been built up too slowly throughout the movie, unlike most other scenes of this nature in other films. And when the two argue, it doesn't feel like the writers are trying to make us feel emotional, but instead, the characters simply letting out everything they've been keeping from each other and all the built-up emotions that they have, while trying to make their final statements on the matter. At this point, Mike sees Sully as a bad friend for risking their jobs and reputations just to save some kid they barely know. But really, Mike is the one who's been acting like a bad friend this whole time. Throughout the movie, he has been constantly trying to phone in his attempts at fixing the problem, stopping them from actually making progress, or intentionally trying to do something else that will get him out of trouble but wouldn't benefit anyone else. Mike thought that what he wanted was what both he and Sully wanted. But eventually he realizes that Sully has been acting selflessly, risking everything to save a kid he barely even knows, yet has come to love anyway. Meanwhile, Mike has only thought of himself, never even considering that Sully could have different goals and desires than him. And one thing I especially love is how Mike comes to the realization that he is wrong. He doesn't realize how selfish he's been acting until he says his feelings out loud and compares his words to Sully's. We usually think that we know everything in our heads, but once you say something out loud, you will often find that it doesn't sound as good out loud as it did in your head, and that someone else may know better than you. It is our basic selfish desire to always be right that constantly blinds us to understand the perspectives of other people. And so, this breakup scene is actually an amazing addition that is the perfect and most realistic way to have Mike realize the error of his selfishness. And from here on out, he too is willing to put Boo first and stop the problems at Monsters, Inc. And we can see that once he starts working with Sully instead of against Sully, that amazing teamwork they showcased at the beginning of the movie is what leads to their success in the end, showing that if they had just worked together from the beginning, they probably would have succeeded a lot sooner. And did I mention that on top of the great character writing, he is absolutely hysterically funny.
Oh, that darn paperwork. Wouldn't it be easier if it all just blew away?
This big-head, one-eyed bozo is one of the most hilarious characters I have ever seen in any movie. I tell you, there isn't a single scene in this movie in which Mike doesn't say some hilarious banger line.
Where is it, you little one-eyed cretin? Okay, first of all, it's creepy. If you're gonna threaten me, do it properly.
And/or something happens to him that is beyond hilarious. I mean, there's a reason there's so many Mike Wazowski memes on the internet, with my personal favorite being this one.
He did. No?
This office is now closed.
And it hit me while watching this movie on my most recent viewing that the film, despite being so funny, doesn't have any traditional comic relief character, outside of a few minor characters anyways. Some might say that Mike is the traditional comic relief character, which is true in that he does fill that role well, but there is so much more to him as a character that I wouldn't actually call him a comic relief character, at least not in the sense of a traditional comic relief character. People often find comic relief characters annoying, and the thing that hit me when I was watching this movie is that I finally know why Mike is so funny and works so well, while many comic relief side characters don't work. It's precisely the fact that he isn't designed to be a comic relief character, but rather a fully fleshed out character who happens to be a really funny guy in a well-written and highly clever script. And speaking of comedy, I think I've pretty much said everything I need to say about Mike already, so why don't we talk about what makes the comedy so good next? For starters, the jokes are very clever. Now that alone is basically the key to good comedy. To introduce an idea and subvert the audience expectations in an exaggerated or unique way. That's basically all you need for almost any movie to be funny. But, of course, this movie does far more than just that with its humor. Firstly, the humor in this film is based mostly on character interactions and sticky situations, which are some of the funniest kinds of humor when done right. Why? Because they are the most relatable. Simple as that.
Now put that thing back where it came from, or so I'll be!
Watching someone like Mike slowly losing his mind as the situation keeps going downhill despite his best attempts to stop it is just hilarious and one of the reasons he is so funny.
Through, you hear me? Through!
Here's the truth. You know the kid that they're looking for? Sully let her in. We tried to send him back with one who said the secret plot, and now Randall Fern's behind us, and he's trying to kill us!
I think it really works to this movie's benefit to focus primarily on this style of humor, as it balances out the more out there and crazier parts of the movie, so that it remains relatable and grounded. And furthermore, this type of comedy works perfectly with the tone and style of this movie. This is a film about business monsters going reluctantly against their corporation because of unforeseen circumstances and corruption, which doesn't really suit extra silly, over-the-top slapstick humor very well, does it? And did I mention that the comedy also perfectly fits Mike and Sully as characters? Firstly, because of their simple position as workers in what is essentially a factory or power plant. Their arguments make sense coming from their positions. Both have worked here for many years, and thus each believes they know best. They are also a classic comedic duo in that you have the serious one and the silly one. A match which causes many disputes between the characters for our entertainment. In short, their personalities aren't just funny when put together, they are intricately crafted to bring out the best comedy from each other. And also, John Goodman and Billy Crystal are impeccably well cast and bring an unreal amount of personality and charisma to these characters. On top of all that, the comedy is further perfected by how well it is integrated into the story and world. The jokes aren't just funny on their own, but they also add to the world building and characterization in this film, such as how the famous joke of Mike's face being blocked by something on TV reveals that Mike really wants to be famous, and that, even if it is for a short period, it gives him the bragging rights to claim he was on TV, so that he can boost his reputation. All that from one joke. Or how about this scene with Randall?
What happens when the whistle blows in 5 minutes?
I get a timeout?
Which subtly shows us that Mike doesn't think as well under pressure, making stupid guesses as to what Randall means because he is more stressed about getting caught than thinking about logical answers to what Randall is saying. And most of the rest of the jokes in this movie are just as well integrated as these examples. Additionally, there are very few one-off throwaway jokes in this movie because the jokes are always building upon themselves. Like this iconic scene.
2319! We have a 2319!
Oh, but firstly, did you know that 23 and 19 actually mean something here? They are the 23rd and 19th letters of the alphabet, which are W and S respectively, which of course is short for white sock.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yes, my friends, that is genuinely how insanely in-depth and thought-out the jokes in this movie are. On its own, this joke would be funny, but it wouldn't mean much outside of how hypersensitive to human interaction these monsters are, but the movie goes much further than that. Later in the movie, we see the same poor guy get into the same situation because of Sully placing the human stuff that got stuck on him in his locker. This joke revival isn't just funny because of the irony of the same guy having the worst day ever twice, but it is also cleverly set up by Sully stuffing these things into the locker earlier. You almost never see jokes set up ahead of time like this in modern movies, probably because that would take effort and brainpower to advance for the cheap, cash-grabby modern executives, writers, and directors. Additionally, it is unexpected because no one would think such an elaborate joke as the first 2319 would be brought up again. And also because we, the audience, most likely forgot about Sully stuffing these things in the locker. It pays off a loose end that we didn't even think about, while also being a hilarious continuation of a joke from before.
But wait! There's more!
This joke is even funnier because of what is implied rather than what is shown. We already saw what happened to the guy the first time, so we don't need to see it happen to him again. That would be repetitive and would ruin the joke. Instead, the movie trusts us to remember what happened before and use our imagination to think of what is happening to him off screen. And so, the joke hits harder because our imagination has been trained by the first scene to think of the worst case scenario. But that isn't the last time we see this joke. It's brought back one final time, using the rule of thirds in comedy, in which a joke is used 3 times, building upon itself in different ways each time, usually leading to an ultimate subverting of our expectations in a satisfying way the last time that it's used. Which is exactly what this movie does with the 2319 joke. But this time, when those fated numbers are called out, it's George who gets the last laugh, chucking his quote-unquote friend into the human world, never to be seen again, finally ending his own personal nightmare. A hilarious and satisfying conclusion to this running gag. I bet you didn't expect me to have that much to say about one joke. Just more proof of how layered the comedy is in this movie. And the jokes aren't just funny, they also set up several clever moments throughout the plot. So you know the 2319 joke I was just talking about? Well, I'm still not done with it. This movie practically breaks the fourth wall and your mind by tricking you into believing that the joke is over, since we not only got a satisfying conclusion in its last appearance, but also because it seemingly followed the rule of 3 in comedy. However, this movie throws a complete curveball at us by bringing the joke back one more time in a clever way. And not only is it clever because just like the second time the joke was used, we don't expect it, thinking it has run its course, but also because it subverts the way the joke has been used up until this point, managing to still feel fresh despite passing the usual limit of 3 uses. And it does this by having the 2319 be used by our main characters to their advantage, whereas previously we had only seen it be a disadvantage to people. And this joke is actually quite important to the plot, because it's a clever way of using something that has already been established in this movie to help the characters get out of their situation. You know, instead of just making up some complete nonsense on the spot. And on top of everything else great about the comedy in this movie, there are no fart, butt, or otherwise crude and immature jokes used here. Proof that you don't need that kind of low-blow humor to make a movie funny. You listening, modern animated movies? But the comedy isn't the only thing in this movie that manages to be clever and twisty to keep things interesting. The plot is also filled to the brim with that kind of stuff. One of the first twists in this movie comes in the form of Boo's arrival into Monstropolis. While we did see a monster being afraid of the fake human in the intro, and have been told that humans are deadly, we haven't actually seen most monsters react to them. And when Sully first sees Boo, he is terrified. Even though we've seen other monsters be scared of humans before, until this point, our minds most likely just classified them as cowards. But once we see Sully's reaction, it really settles in how seriously these monsters take the deadly human business. And what's better than that is the reaction of the whole world. The restaurant scene is another that throws everything in this movie on its head. It completely subverts the idea that monsters scare kids by showing that most monsters are actually more afraid of humans than humans are of monsters. We as humans in the real world only see monsters as evil, scary beasts, but really most of them are basic randomos who have been taught the same about us. And the only ones who actually do the scaring are a select few talented individuals. And just to top this scene off, they even have her say, "Boo." Completely swapping the positions of the characters as we know them. And also the kid-tastrophe joke is hilarious, just thought I'd mention that. This also has a massive effect on the plot, as a massive wrench is thrown into Mike and Sully's plans, upon which the rest of their character development is built on top of. Also, remember when I said that these monsters scaring kids would normally be a bad thing, but this movie manages to make it not only make sense why they do it, but justify it with them needing to collect energy to supply jobs to people. However, that still doesn't remove the thought that you feel bad for the kids who get scared. The movie even acknowledges this when Sully scares Boo, but in the end it turns out that screen energy is not the only source of power, that in fact laughs generate more power. Not only does this lead to an ending that leaves us without the worry of kids being scared anymore, but it is also a 2-in-1 quality message, that laughs are worth more than scares, and that even when you think there is only one way, there is often a better alternative. And of course, I can't not mention the absolutely iconic, always watching you, Roz twist.
I'm watching you, Wazowski. Always watching.
Yet again, the movie uses its humorous tone to deflect our senses from seeing this twist coming. Roz saying this just seems like a funny joke, but it turns out later that she really did mean it, and that everything that has been happening here was being watched the whole time. This allows the ending of the movie to work while also not coming out of nowhere, since technically, whether we realized it or not, this was hinted at early on. And I haven't even mentioned the 2 biggest twists in this movie regarding the villains. But before I can talk about those twists, I should first talk about the villains in general, and everything that makes them work so well. Randall Boggs is easily one of Pixar's best villains. Firstly, because of the perfectly sleazy vocal performance by Steve Buscemi, but also in just how well written he is. His rivalry with Sully is great, and every scene with him and Mike is pure comedy gold. He is furthermore one of the most clever and sly villains in how he is able to track down who it was at the door when he was trying to kidnap Boo. I like how they make him pretend that he didn't hear Sully at the door and just walk away. However, because of his later actions, we know that he obviously did hear something and knows that the kid didn't just wander off, but someone obviously took her. I love how smart Randall is here. He knows someone was there when he was trying to kidnap Boo, but if he reacted to their presence and tried to find them, he might be forced to admit his plan. So he intentionally pretended not to hear anything so that he could keep his secrets. Doing this also allows him to remain innocent if someone else is caught, since he can just blame them instead of getting caught up in all the accusations. And since a kid in the monster world would be pretty obvious, he can still easily figure out who it was that was there. And because of his suspicions, he is actually able to figure out who's behind this ordeal. And I like that nobody nobody noticed Mike in the news picture because of how he is always cut off by the camera. But Randall, who is more clever than most characters, is actually able to notice Mike. And then there's the big twist relating to Randall. The twist being that he isn't actually breaking the rules to improve his record as Mike believed.
You still think this is about that stupid scare record?
Well, I did. Right up until you chuckled like that.
But that he is actually doing it to illegally solve the Scream energy crisis with water noose. This twist is really cleverly written because it seems so obvious that his plan was to break the record. Since he's so salty over Mike and Sully being better than him, we, the audience, never question this being his motive. And yet, when we do find out what his plan actually is, it makes perfect sense. Arguably more sense than what we initially thought. Furthermore, I like that, while being primarily a selfish character, Randall actually thinks that breaking the rules will be for the benefit of their society. It gives his character a twisted sense of self-righteousness as well, that he can prove he is the best and solve the world's problems at the same time. But he wouldn't be nearly as great of a villain if he weren't also so ridiculously entertaining. I just love how he fully believes in his superiority. Unlike some other selfish characters who act like narcissists, Randall doesn't have some sad backstory for why he is the way he is. He's just out to spite people and prove that he's the best. He has pretty much always believed he was the best, at least since Mike gave him the advice about his glasses in Monsters University, and thus it isn't about validating himself, it's more about setting the record straight. And because he's so confident, it leads to some of the funniest interactions, especially when he is messing with Mike, someone whose confidence is not quite as high.
You hear that? It's the winds of change.
His jerkish remarks are hilarious, and even when they are cheesy, he still says them with full confidence. You can tell he just relishes seeing people's reactions to his nonsense. But he is just one of the two amazing villains in this movie. We also have a Water Noose, who is quite easily the best written twisted villain in the entire Disney and Pixar combined catalog. One of the first things I love about Water Noose as a villain is how much his plan actually makes sense. He is the boss of a rich and important company, but his profits are down because of production troubles. And worse yet, his company's failure to keep up with production has consequences on the rest of the world. So in order to stay in business and keep the lights on across the world, he is willing to resort to criminal activity. Water Noose believes that he is committing the lesser of two evils, that kidnapping lesser human beings and subjecting them to torture doesn't matter, because they are unimportant and only serve as a source of profit either way. But monsters are struggling out there without power, and they are more important. Water Noose thinks he's the hero in this situation, and when he is eventually caught, he has no regrets and still blames Mike and Sully for everything.
The energy crisis will only get worse because of you!
Showing that he truly believes everything he says. His plan is also very well hinted at. The writers managed to throw in just enough hints for it to make sense and all come together, but not make it too obvious or in your face. Even from his very first scene, Water Noose is constantly bringing up the Scream energy shortage. It's clear that this crisis is more important to Water Noose than anyone else in the movie, since he probably mentions the Scream shortage more than double the times of anyone else in this movie, even the main characters. And every time that Water Noose brings up this shortage, he has the most emotional, upset reaction to it. In hindsight, it becomes clear to us that, obviously, if he cares so much, he ought to be doing something about it. And of course, he was all along. He is also shown to have a little to no faith in his scarers. When he hears that they might actually meet the quota this time, he rolls his eyes at the sound of that, showing that he has come to expect so little from his scarers these days, that them meeting the bare minimum, it's such a small achievement that he can't be proud of them in the slightest. You would think that he would try to motivate his scarers to do better if he actually wanted to end the crisis, but instead he shrugs them off completely, having given up on the idea that they will ever be good enough to keep up with the demand. And another clever hint is that throughout the movie, we see Water Noose talk about how dangerous children are, but compared to other characters, he doesn't seem to fear them, but rather despise them, like a stain affecting his career. When he holds Boo in his hands multiple times in this movie, including this scene where he is faking not knowing what's going on, he isn't scared in the slightest of anything happening to him, showing that he clearly knows that humans aren't actually dangerous, but has been keeping keeping it a secret. It's likely that Waternoose wants the world to continue to believe humans are dangerous because that makes monsters feel more justified in scaring them and motivates more people to sign up to his corporation. And speaking of Waternoose and Boo, in that scene I was just mentioning, where Mike and Sully show up to Monsters Inc. when it's overrun by agents, Waternoose appears and sees Boo for the first time, but he immediately buys Mike and Sully's ridiculous lie about her being a monster relative. And normally, this would be weak writing that undermines a character's intelligence in order for the plot to continue. It seems absurd that the company owner, a man who knows the ins and outs of everything regarding the system and his workers, wouldn't know that there isn't a Bring an Obscure Relative Day, or that Boo is clearly in a costume since he has trained hundreds of monsters and should know every detail about what makes anyone scary. Thus, if anyone could see through the disguise, it would be him. And on top of that, there's also the fact that he wouldn't be able to tell when two of his best workers, who he knows as friends, are clearly lying to him. But the writers were actually using our disbelief that Waternoose couldn't realize this stuff to their advantage, as it becomes clear in retrospect that he was obviously pretending not to recognize Boo so that he wouldn't either give away his plan or get his best scarer into trouble. And later, when Sully and Mike reveal that they have the kid, but she needs to be returned, Waternoose isn't shocked in the slightest. Not only because he knew that Mike and Sully had Boo from his faking scene earlier, but also because he himself knows everything and probably even recognizes Boo. Also, on the subject of Sully being Waternoose's best scarer, I like how upset Waternoose gets over Sully being involved and ultimately having to get rid of him.
Because of you, I had to banish my top scarer.
Since he's a businessman, not a heartless villain, at least when it comes to monsters, he wouldn't want to reduce his profits if possible, and losing Sully would definitely affect not only his profits, but also the reputation of his company. Most other villains in films wouldn't care about Sully, or the writers would force in some nonsense about,
I always hated you, lol.
But the writers of this movie keep him real, showing that it really isn't personal. It's just a business.
Lord business.
All the pieces of the puzzle are there to be put together, and once the twist happens, all his seemingly stupid actions make more sense. This is how you write a good twist, where the story makes more sense after the twist, instead of less sense. And lastly, Waternoose and Randall work perfectly together as villains, not only because they are both corrupt businessmen who want to solve their company's problems and be the heroes of the crisis, but also because of just how impressively well Randall is able to distract the audience from figuring out that Waternoose is the villain. Because of the fact that we already have an obvious bad guy character, us in the audience don't even consider that anyone else could be doing anything wrong here, despite all the clues and hints towards Waternoose's corruption being sown throughout the movie. Peak mind-blowing writing here. But you know what is even more mind-blowing than that? The extremely creative, unique, and exciting climax. This shot of Mike and Sully entering the door storage vault area is one of the most impressive and jaw-dropping shots in animation history. This is the kind of thing that we, the audience, never expect to see. It barely even occurs to us where they would store the doors, and yet actually going there is more than just a good idea, it's pure brilliance. This location has such a massive scope that it perfectly suits a finale while still matching the corporation's setting and all the ideas established so far in this movie. Having this many doors, which are basically just portals, together in one place makes for one of the greatest, most interesting finales in any movie, as the setting is constantly changing throughout this chase. Plus, this is when Randall finally gets what's coming to him, a big whipping. And seeing him be beaten and mocked by a child, a person he thought was so beneath him, even further than Mike and Sully, truly a satisfying moment. And his ultimate fate will never not be hilarious.
Mama, another gator got in the house.
But even this magnificent scene is still beaten by one other in this movie. Well, my friends, here we have it. The cleverest scene in this entire movie. And that's truly impressive when you consider everything else I've mentioned so far. This scene starts off, of course, with the joke that we've already talked about, the fourth and final use of the 2319, so I won't go over that again. But it is a perfect way to distract everyone and get Mike and Sully out of this situation while building upon an idea idea we've seen throughout this movie. I also love the fact that Sully deliberately runs into some of this stuff to get Waternoose's attention, and I love it because it shows us beforehand that this is a trap. Because, you see, Sully is not an idiot, and only an idiot would run into that stuff. Oh, and also I like that it pokes fun at all the idiots in films who are trying to sneak around and inexplicably run into things and knock stuff over on accident, ultimately getting themselves caught. Most of the time, it is borderline unbelievable that someone would make a mistake like that. And this movie agrees, by showing that it only happens here because Sully deliberately did it to get Waternoose's attention. Then you have the fact that they use the test room from the beginning of the movie, which is genius. Because this simulation perfectly replicates a room so well, even Waternoose, in his heat of fury, wouldn't second guess. I also love how Sully never actually pushes the button to activate the door, but Waternoose is so obsessed with stopping Sully, he doesn't even stop to think about that. And furthermore, it has cameras everywhere, so no matter what Waternoose says, it will be recorded, and even if he only lets slip a little, it will still be caught on camera. It is a perfect trap. Waternoose is so emotional here that he can't help but angrily out himself. Another thing I love about this scene is that Waternoose believes he is safe because he's in the human world, and therefore no one can hear him. And so when he finally reveals his intentions, he doesn't hold back. And unlike most villain plan reveals / confessions, Waternoose isn't explaining his plan so that we, the audience, will understand the plot. He is angrily venting at Sully for not agreeing with his ideas and plans. He can't believe that no one except the now defunct minion Randall actually thinks he's right. The greatest part, though, has to be the legendary...
Let's watch my favorite part again, shall we?
Yeah. It's rewind time.
Having the villain essentially defeat themselves is just perfection. The most satisfying villain defeats are the ones in which the villain is not only defeated, but embarrassed by the main characters as well. The way Mike repeats his big mistake over and over again is like rubbing salt in Waternoose's wounds, and I love it. Plus, it makes sense that Mike is with the agents, since he was probably forced to tell them what happened, thus leading to them realizing the trap laid by him and Sully is actually to their advantage. This ending scene is so iconic and genius that it has been ripped off countless times by other movies and TV shows. Even Pixar themselves ripped off their very own scene in Coco. You know, with this part.
He's a living child of this. He's a threat. You think I let him go back to the land of the living with your father?
And, well, that's pretty much all the main stuff, but I probably should also mention Celia some more, since she is also a great character, though less plot relevant, so there isn't as much to say about her. But I do love how forgiving she is when she realizes the scope of Mike's situation. She was right to be upset, but chose not to hold a grudge and be understanding instead. Very respectable. And she gets to pull her own clever stunt on Randall, too.
Randall Bob has just broken the all-time scare record.
Huh? No, I didn't.
Yet another satisfying scene in this movie. Strange now we're approaching the end of this video, and yet I haven't even mentioned the amazing opening titles. Not only are they super uniquely stylized, but they are also perfectly synced to the iconic main theme of this movie. I wish more movies still had creative title cards and intros like this. Alas. And even all the way to the credits, this movie is still mind-blowing and clever. This movie is responsible for blessing us with the iconic masterpiece known as If I Didn't Have You. Not only is the song in and of itself clever, with funny lyrics and frequently having the characters breaking out of their lines to comment back on what the other person is singing, but the very concept of the song is more unique than most other credit songs. Many movies like this either feature a pop star reprise of a song featured earlier in the movie, or just use instrumental music, whether original or reused. But this movie does neither. It's incredible.
Never hide your Reese's eggs in the basket. I mean, come on. It's the first place they'll look.
I've been thinking recently, I ought to review some more non-Disney movies. After all, I watch more stuff than just Disney. But where to start? The obvious answer, of course, could honestly be anything. But the best answer is definitely DreamWorks. One of the only other animation studios to make animated movies that can match even the best of Disney. One sad fact about Disney, though, is that most of their modern movies aren't as good as their older ones, which has put DreamWorks in a very good spot recently, especially when it comes to Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I didn't really pay too much attention to this movie until it came out. And then suddenly, everybody started raving about it. So I thought, might as well see what all the fuss is about. I entered this movie as a different man than I am now. I have seen the magnificence it has to offer. For once, the critics were actually right. This is honestly one of the best animated movies